Hey everyone, welcome to the Reality Podcast Show. My name's Brad, and we are going to have a little conversation about some things. Let's sit down, grab a cup of coffee. I'll probably grab a whiskey. Let's see who we're talking to today. So Chris, how's life?
Very good. Very
Yeah?
good. For once in London, sunny after the storm.
Yeah.
What about you?
23rd of February, Chris. Don't be too hard on yourself. You're nearly there. You're at the back door of winter.
Fair enough.
Yeah. No, going well, mate. I've just come back from Darwin, so I'm literally polar opposite of you globally and polar opposite of you from a climate perspective. I turned into a puddle while I was up there. It's about 35, humidity is about 103%. So it was killing me. But the beer is cold, which is a winner. Have you ever been to Darwin?
I've never been to Australia, no.
You've been to Australia at all?
No, I want to, but yeah.
I should be able to tell. For those people that are listening, your white skin reflecting off the Zoom is probably a good indicator that you're at the end of a European winter.
That's the UK for you. You know,
Yeah.
like even in the summer, my skin would be the same. It's just
Yeah. And did you ever get down to Cassis or anywhere down on the coast in France to get a bit of a tan when you were younger?
Yeah, I do. Well, I'm French, as some of you might hear. I'm from Paris, but I did spend a lot of time in Brittany, which is the least sunny part of the French coast.
Yeah.
And also in Biarritz, which is
Yeah.
where surfing first came to Europe.
Yeah, I've got a friend who lives in a little place called Massage, which is in the Lalande forest there. They have this little caravan park on the beach, and it is a slither of paradise in Europe that you wouldn't think. And the city in Biarritz is just, and the food, those Basque people, oh man, they're strong people, but the food is good. I like it. So you grew up in Paris, huh?
Yeah, indeed, born and raised.
Yeah, and why London? What happened there? School or?
Well, I wish I could tell you that it was like a very well calculated, part of a big plan, but it wasn't. I had graduated from a business school in France. I really wanted to work in the music industry. That was 2009, 2010.
Okay.
I had written my research paper on independent online word of mouth as a marketing strategy for music labels. Moved to London. Had a meeting at Apple, talking with the head of strategy back then. It was like, what's your vision for the future of music? And I said, well, I think streaming is going to become big. And he laughed me off out of the office. So five years later, we had a little email exchange that was quite funny when they launched the Apple streaming service. But then I just realized that online word of mouth had a new synonym, which was social media. And so I googled social media strategy London. I sent my CV to the first results on page 1 of Google, and I was one guy. So in 2010, you could be number 1 on page 1 for social media strategy and be a company of one guy. And that's not that long ago. When you imagine how much has happened following that, that technology in the past 10 years, you can only imagine what's going to happen with VR and the metaverse and all that.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. So your savvy flavor, if we call it, around being entrepreneurial or having an idea and driving with it, it's probably just you, right? And landing in this space has been a little bit of a growth point from there. That's cool. And that, where this metaverse is going to go, man, that word is killing me at the moment. I don't know how you're feeling about this metaverse word. I get what it is, but marketing just gets out of control, huh? I don't know.
I had a call last week with an investor who told me, we understand what you guys are doing in VR, but what are you going to do in the metaverse? I was like, what do you mean? And so it's a little bit this magical word at the moment that just it's a hyper object, the metaverse, right? It's something that's too complex to really define. And so therefore, we're using a single word to cover Web3, AR, VR, persistent social worlds, all of that. It's very hard to.
I've spent the last 3 months dialing it back in my business, right? So we've had to make a prospectus. So if we go to a customer or if there's some interested person, even if it's not for sales, just informing them about VR, just to dial it all back, because at the moment, some people don't even know what a headset can do, right? Like you've got this expansive difference between all of this narrative in the marketing and then what's actually happening in the real world. That's what worries me. It feels like it's getting further apart. And I'm not worried for my business. I'm worried for the end user because it just becomes more complicated. That's not what the industry needs.
Yeah, there was James Watson who works in XR. He referred to this phenomenon. The name escapes me, but it basically says, with technologies like that, we always overestimate the short-term impact, but we underestimate the long-term impact.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that in 24 months, most of us will spend our life in Roblox VR and working there, having relationships there. But how it's going to change our daily lives in 7, 8, 10 years, I just think we have no idea. But it can only be big.
Yeah, and I think that's the agility of the companies, right? Because people say, what's the metaverse? And my comeback at the moment is, well, let's be honest, we're just dealing with applications like off our phone. There's singular applications that are just doing business, and how those applications become agile in the next 3 years will be their survival, right? Around how the industry grows. And because if I sat down to write a business plan today, and I'm obviously diligent entrepreneur, I need to write a business plan. In 3 months, it's going to be completely different. This is the thing. We have a business plan, but we keep it, we've got headings and then we put the copy in every 3 months because the market moves so quick, right? It is a fascinating thing. But how's Body Swaps going? We probably should introduce you. We just cracked in. I've got a whiskey next to me just to update everybody. It's 7 p.m. here in Noosa in Australia, and Chris is in London in the morning. So you've probably had your coffee, right, Chris?
I'm not having a whiskey. That would be worrying. I have a coffee indeed.
Yeah.
Do you want me to give a quick intro to Body Swaps?
Yeah, we probably should. Yeah. So go for it.
Yeah, sure. So Body Swaps, we're a 3-year-old company. We're based in London. We're about 10 people now. And what we're trying to do is to use VR and AI to automate soft skills training. And the way we do this is we have a range of simulations that work like flight simulators for soft skills. So you find yourself in a body, in an avatar, like you would do in most VR games, except this time you are at a job interview or you in a meeting with a sexist colleague, any of those situations, and you get to interact with virtual humans. So they are pre-recorded virtual humans as opposed to multi-user, and you use your voice, you use your body language, and then you body swap. So you find yourself in the body of those other people to watch yourself back from their perspective. Yeah, that's what we did.
Yeah, perfect. You actually hit one of the, for these podcasts, I really don't have a structure. I just generally have 3 or 4 bullet points. And one of them for our chat today is embodiment in immersive environments. What led you to produce an app where you thought of this idea to put a user and embody them in a different, that's a great concept. What got you to that point? So
before Body Swaps, Julien, my co-founder, and I, we had an agency called Somewhere Else. So we were doing, story-based VR for brands. So we did an experience for Adidas where you were climbing a mountain in Corsica. We did one for the Champions League where you were, raising the Champions League Cup, and that kind of stuff. And so in parallel to creating those experiences, we were reading a lot of the academic research that was coming out of Stanford University and the University of Barcelona at the time. And we were even teaching at university around VR as a marketing tool. And we were using the results of that research to say, well, you see, embodiment is the most powerful storytelling tool there is, because it's not consuming a story, it's living an experience. Mm-hmm. And that means that the memories that you create from living an experience are much stronger than the content that you story. And then there was this one guy, a British guy called Mel Slater, who first had the idea of working with women who were suffering from being very depressed, And he said, well, if an excess of self-criticism, a lack of self-empathy is one of the symptoms of being depressed, can we use VR to minimize this? And so he had this idea of putting those women in an embodied experience in VR, where they would be in a body that looked like themselves in front of a mirror to, forward that kind of virtual embodiment. And there would be a little character of a little girl crying. And the job as a user was to just say nice things to that character for 1 minute. There was no AI, the graphics were very crude, and the girl was programmed to stop crying after a minute. And then they would body swap. So they would find themselves in the body of the little girl and watch their avatar back saying those kind words. And essentially, even after a few months, the benefits of that experience on those patients were still there, were still positive, because somehow that idea externalized giving empathy to yourself. You gave empathy to the girl, then you are the girl, therefore you're giving empathy to yourself. And that's nothing short of a discovery. And so our idea was just one day we got approached to do our first education experience, which was to train nurses in psychiatry. And we just connected the dots and say, well, what if you could give advice to suicidal patients and then find yourself in their shoes, not so much to feel less depressed yourself, because that's not the point, but to feel how you come across. And through repetition, the more you do it, the more you're like, you know what? I come across okay. I come across empathetic and confident and caring, and I'm going to do okay in the real world. And that's the power of VR, and that idea is you not only improve by exercising, you see yourself improve. And that's built the efficacy, self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is demonstrably the one most powerful trigger when it comes to changing behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, that behavioral change, ticking that box is the target, right? And yeah, I think the other thing would be, peer reviewed, an ability to have peer reviewed feedback. But outside of that, once you created that first app, do you feel, obviously you'd have things on the roadmap in the future, that core element, has it been molded away from that idea, or do you think that idea is still central with you?
So that idea was the spark, really. So we built that prototype, and then what we did is we said, we are VR guys, we're not learning designers, and we have to be just honest with the fact that you don't improvise yourself as a learning designer. And so we worked with a woman called Egle Vinayskaite, who's a Harvard graduate behavioral scientist, about 100 times smarter than you and I. And we said, okay, here is 600 pages of research on VR embodiment and new affordances from a behavioral perspective from Stanford and the likes. And you are a behavioral scientist and you have experience as a learning designer. So her job was to say, how can we combine the best of learning design today, so what we know about how human being learns, with the new affordances of virtual reality, and combine it to create a learning framework that accelerates the acquisition of experience, which is essentially what that training is. And so the body swaps is one of the pieces of the puzzle that she came up with. But then we said, people need to know what to say before they say something. So how are you going to do that? You need them to observe. When they're going to observe, you need to make that interactive. Do you show people a bad example? Do you show people a good example? Then you can have that conversation and making choices. But again, how many choices do you give them? How much do you put people on the rail versus letting them be? Do you give people the model before you ask them to give it a try, or do you have them give it a try and then you show them the model? So there's all those questions that really transform what we did from a funky VR experience to a learning tool that happens to use VR.
Yeah. And from your experience so far, as you've scaled, because you guys operate in PC environments as well, is that right?
We started on we started on PC VR. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, and then in order to scale, would you go back to having PC available in terms of multimodal, or do you think having that immersion is critical?
I think having the immersion is critical. About over 80% of the sessions on body swaps were on VR in the past 12 months, right? So it's definitely that's where the medium, that's where body swaps really has its impact versus a 2D experience. We have a lot of like great serious games that use 3D designs, but they're serious games. The embodiment, to come back to this, is everything. However, the reason why having a PC and mobile version is interesting is not so much instead of VR, but in complement to VR. So we have a job interview training simulator, for example, and the idea is the facilitated VR experience that you might have on campus or at your employment agency, it's likely to happen once or twice. Then you're going to have the mock interview with your advisor, which is good. But then maybe the real interview in the real world is going to be 3 months later. And by then you're home. If you have a headset, fantastic, but most people don't.
Mm-hmm.
But you will have a PC or you will have a phone. And to say, oh, I remember the context action result technique, maybe I'm going to just spend half an hour on my phone in the bus going to the interview to remind myself of what it is.
Yep.
And that comes back again to theories of learning where you have to nudge people and they have to repeat to keep things fresh.
Yeah,
and that's why the 2D version is interesting.
Yeah, perfect. No, that answers my question, because one of the other bullet points which just led me there was scalability, because, I'm currently working with a few providers, we're nursing based, 28 million nurses in the world, and they're surely all not living in the US and Australia and the UK. There's a lot of nurses globally, and, low to middle income countries is where most of the population sits. So if my business is going to have an impact, it's going to be in other nations, right? And how do I get a headset if there's a maternity clinic in Tanzania? I always use this example. How am I going to engage those nurses or staff in that area to have innovative education? And you probably summarize what I would say is, you can have 2 headsets which can be refurbished or recycled, older generation, where they can have the embodiment, have the experience, but then access to a PC for the repeatability. I just know that some of the applications I'm working with at the moment, I have heard people say that, it must be in VR and VR only. It's just an interesting angle at the moment, the way people are pushing their applications and what's good for the end user, rather than going solution first, being end user first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So, I have to say, 3 years, now you've got a team of 10. You're doing pretty good for 3 years. Yeah, congrats. Must feel nice. Once now you strapped yourself in, you're on the wave now. Have you ever surfed in Biarritz?
I have tried many times. I'm pretty bad. But...
Yeah. So that's much like me, and I live 5 minutes from the beach. I still suck. But when you're paddling, I use this analogy all the time. You're paddling, you stand up, you feel like you're doing great. You're on the wave, right? You are on the wave, and I feel like that analogy is where you are now. You got a bit of traction, everything's going pretty well. You're going to get down the wave. What's going to happen in the next 3 years? What's going to happen at the end of your ride?
It's very hard to know. I think that it's very interesting to see how the market has evolved, how the wave has grown, so to speak. I don't think I'm on the wave yet. I think I'm seeing it, and we're getting into position. But even 18 months ago, when we were chatting to people, most people we were having on the phone had never tried VR, and most people were saying we are exploring. We want to see what's possible. Whereas now the nature of the calls we get is much more, look, we have 10 headsets, we have a trained facilitator, we are using content from those guys around hard skills. We would like to offer soft skills as well. So we entering an era which is very interesting, which is the mutualization of use cases. I mean, on a single headset, you have a lot of different applications, which is fantastic, because up until now, it's like I was selling, I don't know, like Excel but I also had to sell a PC. But I had to explain to people you need a PC to make Excel work, and then I'm going to try to sell you Excel. Now everyone has a PC and they have PowerPoint, maybe they want Excel. So that's where we are now. That mutualization of use cases is really a driving force. The other elements, which is going to take time, more time, is however good the software is and however user-friendly the hardware is, for an organization to deploy VR at scale requires significant human investment. And I think it's, when we're talking to education and universities, to tell them, you know, it's all good that you want to buy 100 headsets, but if you have 100 headsets, you probably need 5 to 10 full-time VR facilitators. And if you have 100 headsets, you're going to need 10 rooms, 10 different rooms to have those 10 headsets. And ideally, VR pods in those rooms so that people can take their training individually. That's significant investment. And so I think that's the phase we're at right now. Trailblazing organizations get that, and they have hired people, and they are starting to scale, but that's very, very much the beginning. And as soon as the infrastructure, the human infrastructure is there, then then the use case will be mutualized, and it's going to become the new normal. So that's what I'm hoping in 3 years. That when I call someone about VR, they're like, yeah, whatever, I know VR. What do you have to offer? So the day VR is not a novelty, it actually makes me happy.
Yeah, one of my idols, is Jaron Lanier. Do you know Jaron Lanier?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So he's got this quote, virtual reality gives us a renewed appreciation of physical reality. It's not great. It does have its downsides, and scaling is the interesting point right now. And I totally agree with most of the things you say. I think you're on the wave. I think you're definitely on the wave. It's just, the analogy is great because the wave's taking you. You know what I mean? I think that's a lot of companies at the moment with this metaverse. They're just going with the wave. There's not a lot of internal control about what's good for the end user. That's one thing I worry about, because it just creates this confusion, this fragmentation. We've already got it with the hardware. The last thing we want is that with the software. Yeah, cool.
What's your view on what's your view, if you can have a sec, on Facebook Horizons and the one metaverse vision of everyone spending 6 hours a day working and studying and playing with a headset on their face?
I think it's the craziest shit. Look, the point is, do you know how many people are on Facebook Horizons this month?
Yeah, I read like 300,000, right?
300,000 people, right? So, like it or not, it's being thrust upon the general community. What's going to be interesting is how that wave of user impact comes back and forth over 6 to 12 months. Now, at the moment, like that quote I just said, it still feels a little bit like we're strapping a computer on our face, right? I think in order to do some training or education, it's pretty solid use case, but just to hang out, whether consumers are ready for that right now, I'm not sure. I think socialization as a society is really interesting. Like my father-in-law spends more time on Facebook than anybody I know. He's a 62-year-old dude, and like when his son was 16, he was yelling at him, get off that screen, get out of there. So even elderly people now, well, I shouldn't call him elderly, he'd smash me for that. But older people spend a lot of time on screens, right? So collectively across, my 3-year-old can open an iPad, right? My grandmother's 86. She uses Facebook every day. So an entire society and the age spectrum is on a screen. It's not that big of a reach just to use a different screen. I think it just will take a little while, but if you can socialize on Facebook, you sure as hell can socialize in Facebook Horizons. That's my opinion, because it'll draw you in. We've got focused attention. If that analogy, if you've got a flashlight and you're using that flashlight for your attention right in front of you, and then a tiger jumps behind you, right? And you jump over that way. I feel like Facebook Horizon is the tiger coming back at you, drawing your attention all over the place. So
You
it is an interesting time.
Because like 300,000, it's a big number, but if you divide it by the number of hours in a month, it's like 400 people an hour. So it's not insane, right?
Yeah.
Have you heard about that guy called Louis Rosenberg?
No.
So so he was a researcher in the VR in the 90s, and he made 2 points recently, which are very good. Point number one, he was basically saying AR is going to win the metaverse. And the reason for that is from a pure, so he's a neuroscientist. From a pure neuroscience point of view, however good your hardware is, VR is a blindfold to reality, right? It's depriving you of your audiovisual senses to plug something different. And he's saying, as human beings, we are hardwired to not like that, because we were not always at the top of the food chain, right? And he doesn't say there's not going to be, a big metaverse in VR, but he's saying it is still likely to be focused, apart from hardcore gamers, to be focused time. On the other end, he wrote a small, like a short story called The Metaverse 2030, which is really a fun read. And it's about this guy in 2030 who's 68 and has lost his wife and is a bit grumpy and lonely, and he finally goes to the Apple store to get the version of the AR glasses because his grandson has told him to. And then it's essentially almost a romance where how he meets a woman in a park, but all of that is guided by an augmented reality assistant that has all the data about everything, where they are, what they want, and I think that version of the metaverse where data and artificial intelligence are connected, superimposed onto the real world to serve what you need, and the spatial representation thereof. It's not about having elephants floating in the sky in AR. I don't think it is that important. It's the connection of the data with the real world. So those two pieces from Louis Rosenberg are amazing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, who knows is the answer, right? Like, who really knows? There may be focused immersion sessions in VR. People use AR transferably. Like, where's the hardware going to go, right? Like, the new Vive headset, the Flow, isn't perfect, but it is 300 grams. It's a pair of glasses. So who's to say that VR AR, you could have the one pair of glasses that can transferably flick between the two, depending on the computing power, right? So, you could have that extended reality aspect. I'm talking 5-10 years down the line, the hardware may be able to support something crazy like that. I don't know. But
I mean, you in 2015, when we started in VR, we had the HTC Vive. So to go do demos at clients, we needed to be 2 people, because I couldn't carry everything. We had 2 tripods, the sensors, a gaming PC, a monitor, the headsets, the controllers. It was insane. And you needed half an hour to set it up. You needed a 9 square meter room minimum. I mean, it was ridiculous. And that wasn't that long ago. And now I fit three quests in my backpack when I go see clients. So you're right. I mean, who knows where we're going to be in 5 years?
Yeah. Fascinating. 5G networks as well allow that transference and that AR concept, which is, that you talked about infrastructure, that network is a part of that discussion as well, which is interesting. So, all right. Now, outside of that, can you see, from a market perspective, how's Europe going compared to the US? This is one thing I find interesting as well, is that I've got innovation on here and the way we digest it. Do you find territorially you're seeing different ways that people approach innovation?
100%. A couple of months ago, in the space of 1 hour, I had 2 calls. One with Canada, and one with a college in the UK. The college in the UK told me, I have good hope that in 3 months, I'll be able to get signed off for 2 headsets. The college in Canada told me, I just ordered 50. I just ordered 50, like right now. I just did it 2 minutes ago, and that's a little bit what it is. There's just like size matters, I guess, when it comes to innovation. The colleges we're talking to in the US have, anywhere from 10 to 50,000 students. In the UK, it's a tenth of that. So obviously, the innovation budget are tighter. It's not that the spirit of innovation is not the same. It's just the relative risk involved of trying out a new technology is greater if you're small than if you're big and you can absorb the potential failure. We see a little bit the same with investors. You talk to investors, they talk a little bit too much about the metaverse, but they hear Mark Zuckerberg, they say, it's $1 trillion investment. Like they kind of say, they're like, we see it's coming. Can you carve yourself a piece of that cake? But they really believe in it. Whereas in the UK, the conversations are more, we're not sure, headsets are expensive. And like, no, they're not expensive. They're a shared device. Like it's going to cost you less than 50p per person if you have 2 people a day using a headset. So it's not so, I think there's an 18 to 24 months kind of delay in the conversations, but it's going there. And when you see what's happening in VR in the US now, the Accentures, the Bank of America, the Tailspin that just raised, the Walmarts, it's the wave, to go back to your surfing analogy, is coming from the Atlantic Ocean towards our shores.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. I've got a meeting with a university this week in the US. They've got 29,000 students. In Australia, we've got like 500 to 1,000 nursing students. So that scale is just, and poor little Australia, we're a good country, but we've got good quality, but we are risk averse with the UK. We're probably sitting here having a cup of tea thinking about it. While the US is having a mojito and just getting on with it. But that comes with a level of risk on their behalf as well. So, and that the last thing, the dot point I've got probably leads us to that is research. I'm currently talking to investors, many investors. They're all sort of from different regions, but also different viewpoints about the work that I'm doing. And a lot of the work, the question that comes up is validity. Okay, they say, here's this metaverse, here's this VR. Who cares? Like, just continue doing your education and do it better. The status quo is the challenge, right? How do we know that this VR education is going to be worth it in the long run? If we do have 29,000 nursing students and this university picks it up and they go ahead, that could be a huge risk for them. There's no research to guide it. And, I'm a healthcare background. I've published papers. I've, got some postgrads and whatever. If you're going to do some randomized control trials, that's good 5 years, right? So what's your opinion around adoption and research, from your standpoint? Do you come up against a bit of that?
Yes, I do. And, we work around soft skills. So our first experience was around active listening, right? And when people told me, how do you measure behavioral change after doing the active listening simulation in VR? I tend to answer, how do you measure it today? Right? The ROI of soft skills training is very hard to measure. What's the ROI of your mom? It's huge. So it's a very tricky question. However, there is some research. There is a ever expanding body of research that shows from the basics in terms of virtual embodiment. Does it work or does it not work? Yes, it works. Okay. Then when you embodied, what impact does this have on memorability of knowledge versus 2D video versus listening? So you already have those, and those have been, those studies have been done by Stanford University, University of Barcelona, serious people. It's always harder to validate your product, specifically your product, because it's just super expensive and long to do research. So what we always go and say, well, on our product, we know what the learners and the educators say. We have data on that because we have, in VR survey and questionnaire and data in VR. In terms of the real world impact, you have to use existing academic research as a proxy and say, we're doing the same, but maybe better as the software they're using at that research, therefore we're likely to have the same impact. But we're trying to work now with some of our partners to demonstrate.
That's my strategy as well, is that, you know, if I'm going to be essentially selling to universities, is that, well, let's just work together, right, to get it right. From the long tail perspective, because it's only going to be good for the industry to do that, right? The last thing we want to do is just sell something for sales and end up in a hot mess. This is good. I got a few. I'm just looking up Louis Rosenberg now. I'm looking up all these names you've been throwing in there, so I can have a look and be a bit of a fanboy down the line. All right, man. I don't want to keep you for too long. It sounds like you had a bit of a storm in London. There's a tree down in the garden, so you've got to pop on your gloves and go and sort a few things out in the yard, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, you probably heard some noise about 10 minutes ago. There was the guy who was supposed to come and cut the tree, who was at the window on my left, knocking on the window, and I had to do some gestures with my arms to that thing.
Yeah.
Podcast now, go away. No, it's been unusually windy for the UK, a bit stormy, but you know, thank God there was no major damage, nothing, no one hurting anyone I know. So it's just a tree in the garden that will make more space for the barbecue when that great ball of fire in the sky.
Yeah, when the daffodils come out and gets to 10 degrees, you hit double digits. Oh, the city starts buzzing, doesn't it? I love it. All right, man. Well, now I've got this analogy of you in these little tight board shorts on a long board on this wave, getting ready to rule the world. It's a nice image, but yeah, honestly, man, kudos to you and the team. I think you're doing a really good thing, and it's not easy. You know, this whole thing's nearly broken me a couple of times already, trying to start a business in a new industry and get it going. It's everyone makes out like being in a startup is glamorous. It's brutal. And you know, the wins are good, but you know, there's the stress in the background. So to get to a team of 10, chatting to investors, you know, you're talking the talk. It's good to see you walking the walk too. So congrats.
Cheers, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. All right. You take it easy, man. We'll talk
Great
again.
evening.
All right. Bye.
Enjoy your whiskey.
Yeah.